The invitation trembled in Margaret's manicured hands as she stared at the elegant script announcing the Children's Hospital Annual Charity Gala. 3 years had passed since that terrible night when her daughter Emma had fought for her life in the ICU. Yet the memory still clawed at her chest like a living thing. The doctors had said it was touch and go, a severe allergic reaction that had sent her 8-year-old into anaphylactic shock during a school field trip. Margaret had arrived at the hospital in time to see Emma's lips turning blue, her small body convulsing on the gurney, and in that moment, she had felt her own soul fracturing. Now, as the newly appointed head of the hospital's board of directors, Margaret threw herself into this gala with the fierce determination of a mother who had almost lost everything. Every detail had to be perfected, from the crystal chandeliers in the grand ballroom to the imported orchids adorning each table. This wasn't just a fundraiser, it was her tribute to the place that had given her daughter back to her. The morning of the gala, Margaret click-clacked through the hospital corridors in her designer heels, clipboard in hand, checking every last detail. The event would begin in 6 hours, and she could feel the familiar tightness in her chest that came with high-stakes perfectionism. She had invited the city's most prominent philanthropists, business leaders, and socialites, people whose checkbooks could transform the children's ward into something truly extraordinary. As she rounded the corner near the main lobby, she nearly collided with a man pushing a maintenance cart. He was middle-aged, with graying temples and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, wearing the navy blue uniform of the hospital's cleaning staff. She recognized him vaguely. He'd been working here for years, always nodding politely when they passed in the hallways. "Excuse me, Mom," he said softly, stepping aside with a gentle smile. "Congratulations on tonight's gala. I heard it's going to be something special." Margaret barely acknowledged him, her mind already racing ahead to the next item on her checklist. But as she continued down the hall, something nagged at her. There had been something in his voice, a warmth, an investment in tonight's success that seemed oddly personal for a janitor. Later that afternoon, as Margaret supervised the final preparations in the ballroom, she spotted him again. This time, he was carefully polishing the brass railings near the entrance, his movements deliberate and thorough. What struck her as strange was that he was wearing a tuxedo underneath his work apron, and not a rental, but a well-tailored suit that spoke of quiet dignity. "Excuse me," Margaret called out, her voice carrying the authority she'd cultivated in boardrooms. "What are you doing here? The gala starts in 2 hours, and I can't have maintenance staff wandering around while our guests arrive." The man looked up, and again she was struck by those kind eyes. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harrison. I was just finishing up some last-minute touch-ups. I'll be out of your way shortly." She blinked, surprised he knew her name. Most of the hospital staff knew who she was, of course, but something in the way he said it felt familiar. "That's not what I mean," Margaret continued, her stress making her voice sharper than she intended. "Why are you dressed like that? You're not planning to attend the gala, are you? Because I have to tell you, this is a very exclusive event. The tickets are $500 per person, and we have a very specific guest list." The man's face fell slightly, but he maintained his gentle demeanor. "I understand, Mom. I just thought. Well, I've been working here for 15 years, and I care about this hospital. I saved up for a ticket because I wanted to support the cause." Margaret felt a flash of irritation. The last thing she needed was well-meaning staff members diluting the sophisticated atmosphere she'd worked so hard to create. Her donors expected elegance, exclusivity, and not to be seated next to the help. "I'm sure you mean well," she said, her tone softening slightly but remaining firm. "But this event is really for our major donors and community leaders. Perhaps you could support the hospital in other ways. I'm sure your supervisor could arrange for you to help with cleanup afterward if you'd like to contribute." The hurt that flickered across his features was so brief she almost missed it. He nodded slowly, began removing his bow tie with quiet dignity. "Of course, Mrs. Harrison. I understand completely." As he walked away, pushing his cart with those same careful, deliberate movements, Margaret felt a small pang of guilt. But she pushed it aside as she had a gala to run, and $2 million to raise for the new pediatric wing. The gala was indeed a spectacular success. The ballroom glowed with golden light, and Margaret moved through the crowd like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of generosity. Checks were written, pledges were made, and by the time dessert was served, they had exceeded their fundraising goal. It was during the evening's emotional Becca when Dr. Rodriguez was giving his speech about the new cardiac unit that Margaret noticed a familiar figure standing quietly in the back of the room. It was him, the janitor, still in his tuxedo but without the bow tie she had made him remove. He must have somehow gotten in through the service entrance. Margaret felt her face flush with anger. How dare he defy her explicit instructions? She began making her way through the crowd, ready to have security escort him out, when Dr. Rodriguez's words stopped her cold. "And tonight, I want to recognize someone very special," the doctor was saying. 3 years ago, we had a little girl brought in during a severe allergic reaction. The paramedics had done what they could, but she was fading fast. It was our night janitor, Miguel Santos, who noticed her condition deteriorating when the medical team was focused on another emergency. Miguel had served as a combat medic in Iraq, and he immediately recognized the signs of anaphylactic shock that were being masked by other symptoms. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. The room seemed to tilt around her. Miguel didn't hesitate, Dr. Rodriguez continued. He alerted the code team and administered CPR when the child went into cardiac arrest. His quick thinking and medical training saved her life. That little girl was Emma Harrison, daughter of our board president Margaret Harrison, who has worked tirelessly to make tonight possible. The room erupted in applause, but Margaret heard nothing except the thundering of her own heartbeat. She turned slowly to look at Miguel, really look at him, and suddenly she remembered those kind eyes beside Emma's bed in the ICU. The gentle voice telling her daughter that everything would be okay. The warm hand on her shoulder as she sobbed in the waiting room. She had been so consumed by her grief and fear that night, so focused on the doctors and machines and medical terminology, that she had barely registered the quiet man in scrubs who had held her daughter's hand and told her she was brave. Miguel's eyes found hers across the crowded room, and in them she saw no anger, no resentment, only the same kindness he had shown her daughter in her darkest hour. He smiled, a small, understanding smile, and began to turn toward the exit. "Wait," Margaret called out, her voice breaking. The word came out as barely a whisper, but somehow the entire room fell silent. "Please, wait." She moved through the crowd, her legs trembling, until she stood before him. Tears streamed down her face, and she didn't care that 200 of the city's most influential people were watching her fall apart. "You saved her," she whispered. "You saved my Emma." Miguel nodded gently. "She's a fighter, your daughter. I just helped her fight a little harder. And I tried to keep you out," Margaret said, her voice cracking. "I was so worried about appearances, about impressing the right people, that I almost threw out the very person who gave me back my reason for living." She reached into her purse with shaking hands and pulled out her own ticket to the reserved seat at the head table she had been so protective of. "This is yours," she said. "It should have always been yours." Miguel shook his head with a soft smile. "That's very kind, Mrs. Harrison, but I'm fine right here. I didn't come for recognition. I came because I believe in what this hospital does, and I wanted to support it however I could. Margaret looked around the room at all the designer gowns and expensive suits, then back at this man who embodied everything the hospital truly represented. "No," she said firmly, her voice growing stronger. "You're not standing in the back. You're sitting at the head table, where the real heroes belong." As she led Miguel through the applauding crowd, Margaret realized something profound had shifted inside her. For 3 years, she had been so focused on honoring the institution that had saved her daughter that she had forgotten to honor the human being who had actually done the saving. That night, Miguel Santos became the guest of honor at every subsequent gala. But more importantly, Margaret Harrison learned that true elegance isn't found in exclusivity or appearances, it's found in recognizing the extraordinary humanity that exists in the most ordinary places. Years later, when Emma graduated from medical school and chose to specialize in emergency pediatric care, she would tell people that her inspiration came from watching her mother learn the most important lesson of all, that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear janitor uniforms, and their superpower is simply caring enough to act when it matters most.